Today's episode is brought to you by Disrupt, the strategic marketing agency on a mission to build the biggest brands in the world. Now, their team of specialists steps in to drive your digital marketing so that you can focus on scaling the rest of your business. What we like about Disrupt is that over and above the expected marketing services offered by a 21st century agency, they position themselves more as a bespoke, outsourced strategic marketing function. And in fact, the Disrupt team is behind our very own Startup Club podcast, and they've been a real asset. We can wholly endorse their skills, quality, and service. To learn more about how they could help your business, visit disruptx.co.za. Welcome to the Startup Club podcast, where we share the journeys of invention, failure, resilience, and triumph of some of South Africa's foremost tech startup founders and investors. I'm Matthew Marsden, founder of Startup Club ZA, and on the show today, David Akinin, founder and CEO of JABU, one of the continent's leading startups solving last-mile distribution, payments, and supply chain for informal retailers in Africa. Since its founding in 2020, JABU has expanded to multiple countries, grown to a team of 70, and has raised more than $18 million. But as you'll hear from David's life story, it starts with humble beginnings and is an incredible testament to perseverance, resourcefulness, and diving headfirst into opportunity when it's presented.
We can go into all the things. But when we look at all this stuff, we're like, if we have to bet our future on one thing that we're doing really well, and we want to impress the venture firms about where we're headed from a P&L perspective, from a sustainability perspective, and everyone hearing me knows that this is now the norm.
Well, that's the narrative.
This is the narrative.
Not growth at all costs, and now it's about back to basics.
We've never been growth at all costs, and I must admit, this is why we've been so capital efficient. I think many peers in industry are always growth at all costs because they're looking for their next round.
Sure. In Africa, informal retail is still very much king, with hundreds of billions of dollars in consumer goods being sold every year. In fact, it's so large that according to PwC, it's estimated that 90% of sales in Africa's major economies come through informal channels. Think about markets or kiosks. And the IMF estimates that the informal economy in sub-Saharan Africa contributes 38% of GDP. It's also expected that by 2035, the region will add more working-age people to their workforce than the rest of the world's regions combined. And with the International Labour Organization placing more than 2/3 of sub-Saharan Africa's non-agricultural employment in the informal economy, it remains an incredibly important part of Africa's future well-being. Yet, the industry by its very nature remains highly fragmented, with broken supply chains, cash payments, and shop owners and kiosks still having issues around access to capital and getting goods regularly and on time. Now, in the face of these challenges, startups have set out to digitize the informal trade sector in order to help merchants operate more efficiently, enabling them to order, stock, and get paid for their products on time. And at the same time, they're providing a lot of data-driven services to suppliers and manufacturers. In the last 8 years, the B2B e-commerce sector has been a particularly hot one for African venture capital, with investors scrambling to back the next big opportunity. The likes of Wasoko, MarketForce, and Trade Depot have raised hundreds of millions of dollars since their inception. And as one of the newest players on the block, JABU has sprung to prominence by focusing on relatively underserved markets compared to its competitors, and building its platform around the very unique nuances of the markets in which it operates. Since its founding in Namibia in 2020, JABU has expanded to multiple countries, grown a team of 70, and has raised more than $18 million from the likes of global investors Y Combinator and Tiger Global. And their momentum has little sign of slowing down. But of course, it didn't start there. David Akinin was born in Venezuela in 1990 as one of 4 brothers to a part Moroccan, part Spanish Jewish family. His father was a retail executive and his mother was a teacher. Life was what you'd expect from a typical middle-class upbringing. But as the country started to collapse in the early 2000s with hyperinflation and an attempted coup, it got so bad that the family had to flee, a move that would have a dramatic impact on David's life forever.
No, man, thank you so much for what you do for the Startup Club, outside of the Startup Club, for letting us tell our stories, not to other people, but to you, because you dig deep and you help us find our inflection points. I've been telling you that. And this is an important reflection moment, so I appreciate being here.
The privilege is mutual, so thank you, mate. David, you've built what is now, I'm sure in your eyes, still an early business, but it's a pretty significant business if you look at the numbers, if you look at the impact, if you look at the traction in quite a short space of time. But of course, things don't start there. And so we love to take the opportunity to really walk back some of those inflection points in your life and understand what makes great founders tick, what might have been some of the precursors to decisions you made. And so very briefly, talk to us about, how would you describe your upbringing? You're born in Venezuela in 1990. Just if I had to ask you that, what's the first thing that comes to mind? How would you describe your upbringing before you start going to school, maybe?
I would say happiness.
Sure.
I grew up in a very humble, nice apartment with, I guess I'm the second of four brothers. So when I was born, I was sharing a room with my older brother, Abraham, and my brother Sammy was born, and he was staying in the room next door to us. I never understood why the little guy got a full room and we shared, but it was happy, it was good. And I think right around the time that I was going into first grade, my dad had a crazy idea to build a 5-story house, which he probably couldn't afford at the time. So it took him 5 to 6 years to get there. So I grew up thinking around, my dad, my mother is a teacher, which it reflected beautifully at home. Mm-hmm. She brought her heart, her soul to every interaction. My dad was an entrepreneur turned executive at the time. I knew very well that he had been in the import-export business as a very young child, mm-hmm. and that now he was running retail stores as a VP. But then I also knew that on the weekends we were, eating pastries at a shop or visiting a house that's under construction for years.
It's like a lifestyle of not actually living in the house.
Yeah, it's like we have this house under construction, we live in this place. Like, it was a full life. Venezuela was an amazing country. I think it still is in many ways, but it's taken a toll. And very often when I tell my mother I want to go back, I deserve to go back, I crave going back, I want to be involved in society in the ways that I've been in Southern Africa, she often reminds me that what is in my head is the Venezuela of my childhood, not the Venezuela of today. And I hope the Venezuela of my childhood will be born again. I don't think it's far-fetched of a dream.
Sure. We have to believe that, right? As founders creating the future, I think you have to believe in what society might look like again. Very, very quickly, at this time, were you an introverted kid? Were you an extrovert? Were you the center of attention? Maybe tell us about, what type of kid was David?
I would start with my older brother. He was an introvert genius.
Sure.
And I looked up to him so much. So in order to try to sound or be recognized like he was, I was an extroverted wannabe. That's how I would describe myself. And if my brother was reading a book at the age of 7, at the age of 5, I had a book upside down, pretending I was reading it too.
Sure.
If my brother was getting good grades, I was trying to get good grades. If my father was an entrepreneur, I was thinking how to be an entrepreneur. I used to sell, my mom used to make chicha, which is a rice milk with very sweet in the bottom of it. And I used to sell it in school. And my mom's like, are you sure you want to sell? Yeah, I just want to give it to my friends. And I would come back with money, say, look what I sold in school. So yeah, I think I was definitely a center of attention. I was a good kid. That's how my mother describes me. Very studious, very kind. And I think it's a reflection on the type of home my parents were building.
Now, at the time, and contextually for that upbringing, Venezuela was entering an interesting time in its history. Of course, it's been a volatile country for a number of years, decades now. But in the early 2000s, there is some pretty crazy things going on. Hyperinflation, obviously well-documented, currency goes completely off the wall, attempted coup, takeovers of government. But actually, that wasn't one of the hardest things that happened to you and your brothers when you were growing up. And if you don't mind sharing, because I know you've shared that with me and some of our audience in the past, there was actually a time when you were held for ransom. You and your brothers were held for ransom. And that was almost the last straw for your family. If you wouldn't mind
Yeah,
just sharing a little bit about,
I,
about that.
I don't know if held for ransom is the right term because we were kidnapped. I don't think my parents ever got the ransom request. So
Sure.
I think the phrase is held for
Okay,
ransom
sure.
because you're like expecting
Yes.
a ransom.
Yes.
Yeah, we were kidnapped. All four of us. I was 11. This was April 2001.
Hmm.
My youngest brother was 3. He's around here somewhere, walking around, getting a little shave on his face. And it was rough. It was rough because it's a violation of your space, of the integrity with which you live. And you're right. Venezuela had been going through a very hard time. Hugo Chavez won in 1999 with the promise of a better country. I think a lot of people believed it, and I don't blame them for believing it then. But expropriations of land came about, massive devaluations of the currency, crime started increasing, and this creates a faction in society, which you can see in many countries. It splits a society into. If society is split in 7, you kind of have a democracy. But when society is split in 2, you create hatred, create animosity, and that creates massive crime. Hunger creates crime. Lack of education creates crime. And that type of crime gets expressed in things like 4 little children getting kidnapped at the front door of their house in their sleep. Yeah, it was a rough time. My brothers and I managed to escape. It was hard for me because in a hard situation, and this can happen to founders when you're dealing with crises during running a company. I think every experience forms you, but in a hard situation, you also learn a lot about yourself. I fought. This was the last time I ever fought in a hard situation. I defended myself with words, which when somebody's holding a gun is not very smart, And it only hit me later when we had been recovered how I felt. My father was a very interesting character. He dropped us off in school right after.
Put you straight back in.
Put you straight back in. Says life goes on. You don't let yourself get traumatized, get held back, get a moment of introspection that ends up crushing you. Now, I went to therapy for several months. I couldn't sleep. And I don't know if it was the last straw for my parents, which I was very upset about because for me it was. I couldn't sleep. But my parents still believed in the country, still believed in the fact that there was an opportunity. But be that as it may, we had been studying English for years because my father also knew learning a language like English will be the future. And it was actually in 2002 when there was national strikes where no one went to school, where supermarkets were closed for 6 months, where most manufacturing companies shut down hoping they wouldn't get expropriated. Laws were passed where you couldn't fire employees from a company, which now makes everyone like inefficient because they know they don't even have to show up to work. And then there was a coup d'etat that failed 3 days later. Change of government 3 times in 1 week. And when that happened, my father said, everyone pack a bag. We're getting out of here. And we pretty much left everything behind. I will never be able to pay my parents back for the sacrifice they did. I think I will always have to show my gratefulness and be there for them because they packed their bags in ways that you and I would only pack to go on vacation. But they packed their bags and never looked back thinking we need to give a better future for our children.
It's literally putting an entire life in a suitcase.
8 million people have done that now in Venezuela.
Wow.
8 million. So you've lost 30-40% of a population to massive brain drain. And there you go.
And of course, this process culminates in the family leaving your 5-story home and moving to the US. You move to Miami. Again, it's basically starting again. Your dad moves from an executive level position and a 5-story home to you 4 brothers sharing 1 bedroom and obviously trying to get enrolled in school. And he goes on to start a furniture store of all things. And I think it's such a beautiful illustration, hard, of course, but a beautiful illustration of what parents are willing to do for their kids to build to give them the opportunity that they maybe never had or the opportunity they feel they deserve.
Yeah. I think if you were interviewing my dad, he would tell you that was hard. If you're interviewing me, which is the case, I would say it was exciting.
Sure.
I got to go back to my childhood days where I shared a room with my brothers. We never complained. We actually saw it as a positive. This was a vacation apartment we had. And I get to work with my dad at a furniture shop where we met hundreds of people who were interesting, who were cool, and he made the best of it. So I think it's about perspective and willingness to take a challenge like an adventure.
How old were you when this happens?
13 years old.
13. So presumably, I mean, these are formative years. You're becoming a teenager, you're starting high school, and in 2004, you uh, attend Crop Senior High School in Florida. Um, Maybe talk to us about that time. You know, what kind of student were you on the back of all of this context and incredibly disruptive couple of years, especially compared to a traditional upbringing? What kind of student were you in high school, and did you still have that drive to be academically excellent like your older brother?
Yeah, I think my older brother was just very smart. He was academically
Oh, sure.
excellent no matter what.
Yes, yes,
And that
okay.
I still had that drive. Um, when we moved to the US, I was actually at the end of middle school. I went to a private Jewish school that cost $20,000 a year. My father could not afford that for 3 or 4 children.
Mm.
I don't even know if for one, to be honest. And I told my father after my brother sat me down at the age of 13, 14, you know what? I'll go to the public school my brother goes to. And they offered me a scholarship to stay at the private school, but my brother made me see that the public school was amazing. There was about 4,000 students at Crop. And I came home crying the first week. Told my father, I'm just a number, 0045382. That was my ID, like an ID that you need to enter the WeWork offices. And he says, what are you talking about? I says, I don't know, there's 4,000 students, no one knows my name. So listen, we moved from a very small private school where there's 100 kids in my year to another small private school in Miami where there's 100 kids in my year. Now a public school where there's 1,300 children in my year at the age of 14.
And a foreign environment.
Foreign environment, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, mixed, everyone speaking their own language, Jamaicans, Haitians. And to me, it was not that I wasn't welcoming, it was strange, it was different. And then my brother brings a newspaper home. It was called The Lightning Strike. I still have it. And it shows a picture. The title says, overcrowded. Our school was built for 2,500 children. They had to build container classrooms next to it, 16 container classrooms. And it said, overcrowded. And there was literally a picture of me with my big glasses and an afro going down the stairs, and a lot of people behind, but I got caught in the front of the camera.
Sure.
And my father said, I thought you were just a number, but here's you
Yeah, you're famous.
in the front page.
You're the poster child, yeah.
And I take that story very much because I spent 4 years at that high school. You know, the highlights of every year are still very present in my life. It was an amazing time. Those were real formative years. The education was incredible. But more than that, the opportunity America gives you to get involved after school, in French club, in business clubs, to travel to conferences at the age of 14 or 15, to start an NGO or a company and to be applauded for it, to apply for awards or competitions.
Land of opportunity.
I had never heard of any of this, and
Yeah.
this gave me hunger. I mean, seeing my father working hard, starting over, but also noticing that all of this work, I couldn't get enough of what was available. And when I graduated, I can tell you, everything that happened in those 4 years, the teachers, the opportunities were massive. And it was all free. I mean, surely people pay their taxes, and that's how you get that education.
Sure.
But I mean, I remember getting $1 every day from a neighbor for driving him to school. And that was my lunch money. Otherwise, I didn't ever need money for anything else.
David, before we get into what is really the foundation of what will become your career, and a varied, incredibly diverse one at that, you know, when you're in high school now, is there something you want to be? Is it, you know, some kids grow up and they want to be an astronaut or a doctor? Was there something that became a bit clearer for you, or what were the aspirations?
When we left Venezuela, I was crying in the airport, and my mom said, oh, no, don't worry, you'll stay in touch with your friends. And I said, no, I will never be able to be president now. And she cried. My father recognized it and acknowledged it, but my mother saw the hurt. I think that never left me. In high school, I was very involved in student government. I was president of the school student government association. I was president of clubs. I looked for leadership positions. I craved helping be part of something. And I think every child who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s in Venezuela, and those were their formative years, had a massive political exposure. We had cadenas de televisión, which is when the president goes on TV, every channel changes to the president's face. So we grew up listening to presidents speak.
Sure.
And we knew that the change of president was what's going to bring a happy environment. And if I may, a small anecdote I heard about in South Africa. You know, I shared to everyone that this was a dream. And a friend of mine told me the other day, and she said that she went to an orphanage. And this was a question I often ask people: what did you want to be when you were 7 years old? And she asked the children in the orphanage, what did you want to be? And one child said, I want to be the president of South Africa. This happened last week. He said, well, why? She was shocked because she remembered me saying I wanted to be the president. So I found it very interesting and said, well, why do you want to be the president of South Africa? And he said, and this is unbelievable, I don't like the food we eat here. He said, but why does being the president change that? He said, well, the lady who runs this orphanage, this is a 5-year-old, said that the president decided we have to eat this stuff. And if I can become president of South Africa, I will change our eating diet in this center. Sure. And it's this ambition as a young child that can be planted in you, that if you know something is not good, not happy, your life's about to change, and you know it's one responsibility, you will change that. And that's why many people choose to be doctors or engineers, because something inspired them to see that change, and it's happening here in our footsteps. We're inspiring, we're influencing every person's dreams in a very early child by just noticing what is that impacts their life.
Absolutely. It's a powerful anecdote at that. I think, speaking about your first maybe touch points on vocation, if you would, because as your story will show, you've explored, and I think you're very curious, and I think aligning that to wanting to take the lead and maybe responsibility, owning solutions to problems. You actually start your first company in high school, a web design business. I presume you knew very little about web design.
Nothing.
Maybe tell us about that, because this is your first semblance into your own company. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think credit goes to my dad, or blame, or fault. Maybe a mix of all of them.
Sure.
When I was 7, this is 1997 in Venezuela, my father made me a birthday gift, which was www.akinin.com. And, to my mother or my friends, it was like, what is that gift? Like, you cannot even touch it. But he sat down with each of our brothers and he made us an email address. 1997. My email was, and it still is, david@akinin.com. I don't use it as often, but it's a little asset I've put aside since now 25 years, 28, 26 years. So that's always been in my pocket. I've had this website which I could put a landing page or little things. But I used to work in my father's furniture store. I'm now talking 5-6 years after that. When we've moved to the United States, my father ran actually by now 2 stores, very high-end furniture, very similar to the furniture we're sitting with here today. And there was an Italian guy who kept coming into the shop, looking at furniture, looking at everything that's happening in the store. And when you've gone through different life experiences, you become a little bit more skeptical of people. You learn to kind of question things. And I think I've always been that flavor. And I told my father, like, listen, this guy is about to steal your business. He comes here with a notebook, writes down how much is his chair, what colors, what brands. He asks a lot of questions. He's not looking to buy the furniture. He's looking to copy your model. And my father says, listen, you're very mistrusting of the guy. Let him go. We let him go. 2-3 weeks later, he comes into the store. I'm sitting there. He tells my dad to his face that he's opening a kitchen design store, which happens to also have furniture. It was called Abitare Italia. You could see my father turn blue, purple, gray, white, but he was not, my father wasn't a confrontational person in these type of moments. He always had in Spanish we would say chispa, which is like a spark. And he said, well, do you even have a website? I said, no, what do you mean a website? This is like a 60-year-old guy. I said, well, my son David is one of the best web designers you could find here in North Miami Beach, and he can make you a website for very cheap. How much? $80. Now I'm quiet because at this point I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
The guy leaves and I tell my dad, what's going on here?
Sure.
He says, well, listen, you wanted to make some money from him. There's an opportunity. Go see his store, take pictures, understand what he's done, and build him a website. I went on GeoCities, which was owned by Yahoo at the time. You could make free websites. I plugged in a domain name, swiped his credit card for it, made my $80 in 2 days. If you look at the website now, it's probably horrible, all red and black. And I try to make it like the Italian race car colors. And he recommends me to a lady who made art design on ceilings. And she calls me and says, hey, I heard about your web design company. What's it called? I said, Akinin Design. And that was my Akinin.com. Immediately I had to go change my Akinin.com homepage and make it a design website.
Yes.
And listen, I was doing 4 or 5 clients a month. I raised my dad says, raise your price to 100 to 150. Then I started doing parts of websites I couldn't. I started outsourcing to the Philippines or to India to people who could help me design. I made a lot of mistakes. But very soon I realized that I could start earning an income from doing that and from doing Google advertisements for these websites. That's how it looked for recurring income. So this was, at the age of 14, 15.
Which
completely
is
accidental.
Accidental, but to your credit, highly intentional and uncommon, right? I don't know if I at 14 or 15 was hustling my way to a web agency and thinking about things like recurring revenue, let alone actually putting those into practice. You're able to buy your first car on the back of this, and I do want to mention something. You start an NGO called Choose for Africa at the age of 16. Now, of course, starting an NGO in your teens is always remarkable, but this is one of your first attachments to Africa, and that's why I think it's important for us to cover. This involves you sending shoes to West Africa and supporting cocoa pickers, of all things.
Yep.
Won't you tell our audience what got you into that? What was the touch point maybe, and how did you act on that?
I was a dreamer. I think every morning I wake up, I dream a life when I'm awake. I'm sure I dream in the evenings, but I can control my dreams in the day.
Yes.
And one of my best friends, Joel Wisnitzer, and I sat down after a summer of dreaming. I took a class at a local university. I used to take university courses in high school because I found out my high school would pay for it. I convinced my high school to spend the money that was available for me. I sought out resources. So my high school can pay for university classes, I'll take them. So I took biology, I took international relations, all of these extra courses on the side. And there was a guy called Bertin Quadio. He had just moved from the Ivory Coast. He had a very strong West African accent. And he moved to Miami, out of all places. You don't get a lot of African migration. Sure. You get a lot of Haitian, Jamaican, Latin American migration. And I took this international relations course with a bunch of university students. I was 15. And with my dreams of presidency, of leadership, of globalization, I was learning about a very globalized world, about the United Nations, about the world in a very different lens, but taught by an African professor who was speaking about the civil war in Cote d'Ivoire that was happening that year. And as we went into some of the problems in Africa, I saw opportunities through his eyes. And I think very often we phrase challenges around the world like wars or crises as problems, but we forget to see them as also opportunities of things that can have solutions attributed to them. And he did that for me. He explained that this was a world that was changing. I actually remember coming home and screaming at my parents, why did we move to Miami? Everything here is built. We should be in West Africa. Like they're privatizing energy and supermarket chains are not as big as the ones here. Like furniture stores, like whatever we should be doing there. Like, you ungrateful child. Like, we've given everything to be here. Sure. But I think in that dreaming process, Joel and I sat up together. The first thing I did was what I had known to do best, make a website and make ourselves accountable. Shoesforafrica.org. I think we had .com, .org, we had it all. And I started telling people we're collecting shoes. And part of our leadership in high school was you needed community service hours in order to graduate. So we convinced every person in our school, listen, bring shoes, bring shoes. And I started calling embassies. I knew French, so I spoke to people in French. I messed up. I realized I didn't speak French very well. But it was such an incredible, exciting journey, one that I didn't do for money, but for impact. And I realized it was exciting and that you could get people to help you. My parents were not very happy because I was storing shoes at home, thousands of shoes, 30 funky shoes. And then a very kind woman sat down with me, Lilian Stransky at the time, and said, well, what do you need? Warehousing? I'll give you warehousing. What do you need? And then at the time, there was a website called dosomething.org that if you applied for a grant, they would give you money. And this is where I was getting to earlier, is that the opportunities are out there to do whatever you want. The opportunities are out there to get inspired because people are speaking all day their truth. And if you hear with the lens of what can I do, you're already a participant in that economy. The opportunities are out there to get help from people around you. My parents were there always to help, but parents of friends of mine, like this woman who gave me storage, had storage and said, you can use it, I love your vision. And websites, organizations, NGOs in the world who are looking for young people, old people even, who want to make a change are willing to back you. I remember I got flown to New York. My high school paid my flight. Do something that or gave me a $500 grant. My high school paid my flight to pick up a $500 grant. I stayed at my uncle's apartment. I was 16, flew on my own to New York City. I had no idea what was going on. Didn't know what the subway was.
Sure.
And I showed up to this award ceremony where they gave me a big check that said $500. And I used that money to buy boxes and tape. And this was the journey, man. I think it's always about trusting that every step you take is leading in a path forward.
Sure. But it's also a powerful illustration of asking the questions, because I think a lot of folks discount that the answer might actually be yes before they've even tried. And I think that's really encouraging.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
And
my mother says, if you don't ask, you don't get it.
That's it. It's
a bit different in Spanish, but that's the summary.
Sure.
And the only way to get it is if you start by asking.
Absolutely. Wisdom of generations past. Now, I'm going to park that for a moment, but important we touched on it, because obviously that is probably the thing that first made you explore and in some respects fall in love with Africa. You do end up finishing high school, of course, doing a couple of these things, both work and educationally. You attend very briefly Florida International University before taking a summer program at Harvard, world famous university. You attend for a semester, and something pretty significant happens in that semester that maybe gives you your first touch point of the tech world and the venture world in some respects, and that's you actually encountering the folks at Google. And
actually, yes, that was at University of Chicago, my first semester immediately after this summer.
Excuse me. So
yes.
So this is now University of Chicago, 2008. You end up leaving in 2012, but during this process, you're still running your web design company. I understand at the time you'd also set up a postcard business of all things, which may not be your most successful endeavor ever, but it's probably a good experience.
Yeah.
But tell us very quickly, and you've shared this with me offline before, you end up getting approached by Google of all things. And again, you had some web design experience, but how in the world did that happen? And if you don't mind sharing that with our audience.
I think my 4 years in this American high school taught me that opportunities are everywhere. So my first thing, as soon as I arrived to university, I'm on scholarship. I understand probably I cannot even afford to be at this place. So I'm grateful for everything. And I'm in this attitude of like, I'm going to squeeze every opportunity I can get and enjoy the juice, right? Ethically, excitedly, but most importantly, like ambitious. And the first thing I did was go to the career center. I knew that when you graduate university, you have to get a job. In my first year at the age of 18, I signed up for every newsletter you can find in the university, in the tech space, in the finance space. When I was in high school, I was told by people who had graduated high school 2-3 years before me that you're going to have to interview for investment banking. So at a very early age, I was already thinking, what is investment banking? What is tech? What are the opportunities for when I get there? And I think if you're not planning for 4 years down the line, you can't expect those results that you hope for. And I get an email where I'm in biology class saying coffee chat with Google. Now, Google gives little incentives, bonuses, offers, coupons. I said, all right, I'm going to show up to this coffee chat with Google. I don't know what it means. I sign up, I leave class, and 30 people get chosen. It's a first come, first serve basis. And I arrive in this room, Matthew, and it's like, I know I'm in the wrong room. Everyone's wearing a suit, and I'm wearing a shirt and pants. I used to go to class in a shirt, button-down shirt. I just came as I was dressed. And this woman comes out, Paula Quinn, changed my life, and looks around the room and says, wow, you're dressed very googly. Why don't you come with me? And then she picked 2 suits. And we go into this room, and very quickly I realize I'm in the wrong room for sure. This is an interview for a job. Now, the word coffee chat to me could mean anything. Sure. There wasn't coffee in the room.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Like it was an opportunity to get employed by this massive organization that I had heard about and worked with. So I sit down and I realize the interview kicks off, and she asked everyone, well, how does Google make their money? And the first guy says, well, no, Google is a nonprofit organization, so they don't make money. At plain sight, this may look true. The second person says, no, it's like Wikipedia. It's a social enterprise. They have donations and some funds and maybe small income, but in the end, they stabilize themselves. Now, the second person looked a bit bad because he rejected the first person's answer, but gave a very similar one. So she looks at me and says, well, what do you think Google does? And I said, well, Google's the biggest advertising company in the world. I made $1,000 last month with Google, but I think they make X billion. And at the time, I knew how much revenue it was.
Sure.
She was quite impressed that I was right. Google is making information universally accessible. That was her mission. But they are actually an advertising company. Then she said, where's your CV? What did you do last summer? And I said, I volunteered at the Boys and Girls Club of Miami in the Bank of America student high school program. And she said, no, your last summer, your third year university summer. I said, no, I'm a first year. She said, you're a first year? This is an interview for seniors graduating.
How did you arrive?
Yeah, she was, bro. I was like, listen, ma'am, I'm sorry. And then she said, actually, can you wait outside the room for me now? Sure. I was a bit shocked. I waited outside, not sure why. Like, should I stay here? Am I in trouble? These two guys leave. She sits me down and says, I have no clue how you ended up in this room. But the fact that you know what Google does, that you use it, gets me really excited. And I'm going to find out how I can get you there. Look, 6 interviews later about how to find a needle in a haystack and what do you like about Google Analytics and this and that. This is now 2008, 2009. They offered me a job. Oh. And I remember moving to, in May, June of 2009, moving to Silicon Valley. I didn't have money for rent. They paid my flight. And when I land, my mother was going crazy because she's like, you're flying and you don't know where you're sleeping tonight. I said, well, but I will take a taxi to Stanford where I know there must be people that could house me. She's like, how does that even make sense to you? And I slept at a guy's house called Ari Atkins in his sofa during my whole first month until I got my first paycheck. And I moved into a studio where I shared a bed, like I shared 2 small beds with a guy called Chris Husky. And both of these guys are still in my life. And I can tell you some of the most amazing experiences happen when you take a massive risk and you trust people.
It's, I love that. It's such an important lesson in the founder's journey because I think so many folks listening in today have either done that or maybe on the precipice of doing that. And perhaps this is a small nudge to get you moving in the right direction. It's an incredible story, and actually your journey is filled with anecdotes like that. And that's why I'm really excited to have you on the show today. You end up spending 2.5 years at Google, some of it full-time, some of it part-time. There is a brief stint that you then head off to Paris post your studies, or maybe to finish out your studies. If you can quickly just clarify that for us, and where that fits into the equation, heading off to Europe for a year or 2.
Yeah, look, we couldn't leave the United States. We were in political asylum process. We almost got deported once. Horrible, difficult situation to be an immigrant. I think there's a lot of immigrants in the world. I'm an immigrant my whole life, right? Like South Africa, Namibia, Zambia. I'm always feeling like an immigrant, don't belong anywhere officially. Eventually, we got our green card, our residence card, which I'm extremely grateful for. My parents gave everything, both financially and emotionally, to make that happen. And when we did get it, it meant I could finally leave the country, which I didn't need to leave, but the idea that you could travel around the world and do something. So I took advantage of my 3rd year of university to go to Paris on a study abroad program with the University of Chicago, paid for basically by the university and Coca-Cola at the time. And I went practically broke. I had sent all my money from Google, people in my family thinking I don't need money, I'm on scholarship, but trust me, dude, you go to Paris, you need money for more than bread and wine, which is pretty cheap. So I survived on bread and wine for a semester. That's actually when I had the postcard app, which was an incredible failure. We sold it for less than we invested in it. But also a time when my Google manager put me in touch with an incredible woman called Mag, who had started a consulting company doing very similar work to what I was doing for brands at Google. And I was able to work remotely for her, getting a good enough salary per hour that funded my lifestyle in Paris. And also other opportunities came about, which is even why I'm here today.
Well, one of those opportunities, and again, contextually, you've always got Africa in the back of your mind. Yes. I know that's been a really strong draw for you. 2012, you meet an Angolan investor while you're in Europe. Yeah. Talk to us about how that starts to pivot the career or rather the direction of your career back towards the continent.
Incredible guy, was a big mentor of mine for many years. Actually had graduated from my university, American European, but investing in Angola, as you said. And he actually backed me. He said, emotionally, he said, listen, if you want to do something in Africa, you need to learn how money works. By the way, and this whole Africa thing, that's my passion. I picked it up, made it mine. I was interested. It was a continent I wanted to explore. My roots come from there, my mother, all my grandparents. But to me, it's a lesson about being accountable to your dreams by speaking about them. If you don't go everywhere talking about what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, you're not fulfilling your prophecy. You're not fulfilling your utmost potential. If you're too shy to tell your friends, your colleagues, your family, your girlfriend, your peers, your neighbors, the store owner where you shop every day, what you're dreaming about, you're making your life not count as much as those who are. And I learned very quickly that the more I spoke about what I wanted to do, the more you could team up and find cheerleaders. This guy was one who told me, you need to learn how money works. Most people are shy to give others advice. Why? You don't need to tell people what to do. But to actually go out there and tell someone, listen, I believe this can help you, this is massive. And he did that for me. I think your parents very often don't want to tell you who to date, who to be friends with, where to go. Respect that, because they're so involved in your life that they need to have a neutral position.
Sure.
But as a friend and as a peer, it's your responsibility to speak up to your friends who are asking you about their dreams and to provide guidance. And this guy became my friend, my mentor. I left Google at the time, left this consulting company, blind of whether I could find a job. And I got a job at Credit Suisse. And I actually ended up spending 4 years there. I learned how money works. It was an incredible experience. I was able to do well for myself as well, which helped me pursue my dreams. This is really important. The path is not made of flowers where you're floating. You really need to care about how you're going to fund what you're going to go do. And all of these were lessons along the way, but learning how money works became a very important part of my path because somebody made it so.
You do take this job with Credit Suisse. It was in New York, if I'm correct.
New York, Manhattan.
Brilliant. And
also had no idea what I was doing.
You and most folks who enter investment banking, I think, right, on paper.
But I was
and
willing to
discredit,
learn.
certainly no discredit to them, but it is such a large world that you walk into, both operationally and just in terms of the global reach.
I started at 21.
There's one thing academically and one thing in practice, right?
No, I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars in bonds or companies doing a DCF to acquire another company. And I'm like, what does the DCF stand for? You know, like... And like, yeah, you could Google it, but like, can you show it in practice? Sure. And yeah, understanding it takes a couple of years in the bank.
Sure. Now, a very important point here is that even though whilst you were working at Credit Suisse, you took almost every vacation to Africa.
Yes, every vacation.
And you fell in love with Namibia, which again has a strong tie to the future moves that you make. And we'll get back into that in a second. And I think you even brought that up with your boss at the time to say, you know, how can we potentially merge this opportunity, my Credit Suisse role, and somehow involve Africa somehow? How did that go? Was it received well? What did he say?
Investment banking, and I don't know in South Africa, but in New York, investment banking is a very interesting place to start your career because you're surrounded by very ambitious, hardworking, and intelligent people. That's a fact. That's what you need in order to get hired. Do they think you're ambitious, hardworking, and intelligent? Once you get there, everyone's trying to get the next thing. It's this insatiable need for growth. And that next thing is either working in, at the time, I'm talking about more than 10 years ago, it was either working in hedge funds, private equity, maybe venture capital. Today, there might be like startups or other things people look for afterwards. I didn't love working on Microsoft Excel. I'm really good at it. Now it's called spreadsheets if you use Google, but it wasn't my passion. My passion was to be out in the field, to hustle, to negotiate, to inspire, to see a problem and get it fixed, to get in my car and drive to the other end and close something that's not connected. So I was very open, very accountable, very transparent to my peers. I'm not interviewing for hedge funds or private equities. I'm traveling to Africa because I'm going to try to figure out what to do when I'm here, when I'm done here. We have a 2 to 3 year contract. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying I hate my job, please fire me. It just means I have a passion. And I think people respected me after a couple of years of speaking because it was a constant passion. I was supposed to go there to learn how money works for a year. Most of my peers, by the time I left Credit Suisse, had left way before me. And they were passionate about banking because their career path was structured in that sense. For me, after a few trips, I went to Nigeria. I visited the Nwobodo family who hosted me, paid my flight, got me a visa, a Nigerian family, well-to-do in the finance space, but also very politically involved. This was really the family that gave me my first African experience. I was 22. They had flown to Manhattan a few times to celebrate my birthday. I met them in Switzerland when I was studying abroad in Paris. They made me feel like family, and I was so shocked and impressed that my dream was solidified very quickly, and I knew that my career path had to be there. So I went to my boss, Kevin Capel, who was the COO of investment banking at the time, and I said, listen, you know how I got my job. I actually got my job through very interesting ways, giving a letter to the CEO of the bank and so on. So I was known amongst the management as like someone who was out there, a bit crazy. And he told me very, very quickly, what are you talking about? You're going to move to Nigeria? You're Jewish, you're white, you don't know what you're talking about. These are like hard facts, right? And like a lot of people question them, see them, consider them. But he didn't understand that when I landed in Lagos the first time, when I visited Enugu, Abuja, my blood flowed differently, Matthew. And anyone who's been to Nigeria, whether you're Nigerian or not, you know that happens when you land in Lagos. The way people respect each other, want to hear from each other, the charisma in the interactions. This is what made me think that, what am I doing? Like, I was right at 14. Now, my boss very quickly said, listen, dude, you're not doing that.
Yes.
If you're looking for something entrepreneurial, let me move you to Australia. And to me, that was like such a weird option.
Sure.
I'm not Australian. I don't speak Australian. He says they speak English. I said, I get it, but I don't even sound Australian. So I'm going there. Spanish is not something you can add value with, or French. I don't have a passion for the place. What am I going to be growing in my career? And this is such a red flag for anyone who's always thinking of transformations in their life. People will offer you things to help you transform when you're unhappy or when you're looking for something. And very often we take them because we think that's the option. But if it's not aligned with the path you're building and what you're holding yourself accountable to, don't take it. Keep looking. It happens in relationships. It happens in careers. It happens in our family decisions.
Absolutely.
It's like, why? So he says, well, all right, relax, like let's look into it. And 2 days later, he comes back to me and says, look, there's a guy, he's supposed to move to Chile to start the Credit Suisse office. And his wife said no. So if you get on a plane right now, like, we'll get you there. And, after 2-3 interviews that evening, I remember giving all of my furniture to one of my close friends, Jason, who had moved to New York that day, on a U-Haul truck with the key. Called my landlord, said, hey, left you a check for the last month rent. And I moved to Santiago. And I spent almost a year in Chile helping set up the branch, helping hire people, doing some incredible final investment banking transactions that I now understood and was passionate about. There was massive entrepreneurship there. In summary, I learned to love my job. But at that time, that was my first trip to Namibia. I fell in love with the country. And I decided this was it. I had learned enough. I had done enough. And after a year in Santiago, I made the move back to New York, finalized my negotiations with an initial investor, and made my first jump across the sea.
Thanks for listening. We're going to take a quick break. I'm Matthew Marsden, and this is the Startup Club podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Disrupt, the strategic marketing agency on a mission to build the biggest brands in the world. Now, their team of specialists steps in to drive your digital marketing so that you can focus on scaling the rest of your business. What we like about Disrupt is that over and above the expected marketing services offered by a 21st century agency, they position themselves more as a bespoke, outsourced strategic marketing function. And in fact, the Disrupt team is behind our very own Startup Club podcast, and they've been a real asset. We can wholly endorse their skills, quality, and service. To learn more about how they could help your business, visit disruptx.co.za. David, I think it's fair to say that certainly can't fault you at making decisions what would be perceived as on a whim or abruptly, but clearly are always moving toward the vision, long-term vision. Yes. And I think great respect to you for that. In line with the strong connection, again, you're coming up to the end of that tenure in Chile, and one of the big needs that you'd identified in the Namibian market was particularly in the property sector.
Yeah.
And it does lead to you starting a property business. Family comes involved as well at a point. And I just wanted you to maybe chat to where the opportunity was there. Why that? This opportunity to move to the continent and start something. Why Namibia? Why this opportunity? And why then?
It sounds like accidents are part of my decision making, but I was trying to fly to Angola and I couldn't get a visa again, which I think Angola is working on now. They've opened up visas this year for those looking for opportunities there. At the time, it was impossible to get a visa, so I
Sure.
said, "Fine, let me fly to Namibia. It's just next door. Found it on the map, heard about it. Let's go." Namibia was born 5 days before me as a country, like independence, March 21st, 1990. I'm 26. And I found that cute, cool, interesting, random. I thought, I've heard stories of Venezuela in the 1812, America 1776, this place. And I were like,
Brothers.
yeah, twins.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just flew there, went to check it out. And man, when you opened the newspaper, when you wrote that, my strategy was you land in a country, you visit a lawyer, you visit an accountant, and you ride as many taxis as you can. The price of a taxi in Rwanda is like a tenth of what it is in Namibia. So already by paying a taxi, you get to feel the place. But speaking to the guy who speaks to everyone, you get to find out what is going on in a place. This was my 3 things every time I travel to a new place. It still is today. It cannot change. It's the basics of it. And I very quickly found Namibia had perfect laws. Like property laws were established. You could buy and sell property. You can do so many things. From an accounting perspective, I realized that like all the well-to-do accounting companies were well established and were working on things. The rule of law was saying that you could doubt in many markets in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, but it felt, for lack of a better comparison, like very European in the sense that things had been working in a way that was very structured. And it was something I was aware of, very, very able to raise capital for. And I found a crazy opportunity by reading the newspapers and by speaking to taxi drivers, which was that in Namibia, if you were a civil servant, about 67 to 70% of your mortgage payment would be subsidized by the government. Now, what is a civil servant? Teacher, nurse, police officer, farmer, you name it. Now, in South Africa, you have RDP housing. The South African government has provided a lot of free housing for people. I'm not sure how the titling works or how the payments work, but it's this idea that here's your keys, we've done right by you. In Namibia, I think they took a different approach, even though Namibia and South Africa are so tied together. And they realized that if we subsidize the supply side of the housing space, contractors will run away with the money, or they will not build it to spar. But economically speaking, if you're subsidizing the demand side, the buyer, you're empowering the buyer to make demands up on the sector. And if we follow economic theory of Adam Smith, the invisible hand, you expect that if there's somebody subsidizing the demand, the supply will come.
Absolutely.
Build it, they will come. It didn't happen.
Yeah, sure.
So I actually went in and I said, let me go give mortgages. Maybe nobody's giving mortgages in this space. Now, 2/3 of a mortgage would be subsidized by the government. People had pension fund accounts, all government employees. So the remaining third, which would be financed by the bank at risk, quote unquote, could always be collateralized by a pension fund law that allowed you to use your pension fund account to back the mortgage as well. So I thought this is a no-brainer. I raised $1 million. I was 24 years old. I moved to London.
And this is from that investor who had
From
said
this
to
guy
you-
back then who told me learn how money works.
Yep.
And I said, I'm going to go give mortgages. And I went in, I looked for it. I put ads in, one of my strategies back then, and I'm not giving out my secrets, but I just hope the world gets more of like this kind of noise in it. One of my strategies back then was I would buy ads in the newspaper and get people to sign up on a link. And my ads were strategic, were interesting, were fun, all out of pocket, $100. I thought it was like a game. And I had, this is why I quit my job. I had 2,000 people registered in my forms in 2014. And I just told my boss, dude, I'm out. Like, I'm moving to London to raise capital, to move to Namibia to do this. And I was flying back and forth. And I pretty quickly realized 3 things, Matthew. The first, you cannot build a business in Namibia based in London.
Sure.
Which my investors wanted me to.
Sure.
So for those of you who are trying to get your business up and running, like my lesson was get your hands dirty every single day.
Yep.
Not in a pilot project or on the weekends. Like if your hands are not dirty, you're not the builder. The second was, can't build anything without a team. I was talking to myself. You need to be able to complain, to argue, to put things on a wall, to look away from each other, or to get inspired with each other. And the third thing, which was a little bit more harsh, was that you cannot give mortgages if there's no houses. And Adam Smith actually may have been wrong. you need real incentives for the supply side to exist.
Sure.
I had to become a builder very quickly.
Absolutely. And I think you've shared with me that that adoption was so hard because the supply side didn't exist. And you pivot, if you would, this business into a construction company, build 3 houses. Those were pretty successful on the basis of the model that you started employing. And in 2017, you start building schools, hospitals, variety of different projects. And I think you could probably see a path to, wow, this is actually becoming something.
Yeah.
Obviously, you had investors saying to you, actually, David, we want you building this from London. You've moved to Namibia now because you want to get your hands dirty. And you can probably see in the fruit of the business that that's paying off. A little bit of disagreement, if you would, between you and that initial investor. Do you mind touching on that, of course, and disclosing whatever you like? Because these are very important engagements, and a lot of founders are not willing to speak about the ones that complicate themselves.
Yeah, it's changed my life. It's probably on a one-on-one off the record, happy to always, this is not about him or me, but I think it's oftentimes where you're not aligned. And I think it's hurtful to lose someone who can be a mentor, who can be someone who can disagree with. I'm a huge believer, whether it's in business, at work, or even relationships, that you need to be able to sit in a room, look eye to eye, and give everything on the table. Genuinely say, this is who I am, this is what I've done. And if you've been honest, you've shared what you've shared, there's no way you cannot work together. Now, there was an interest from the other side that I expand to other countries that I didn't feel comfortable in, or to do things in ways that I didn't want. There was probably from the other side an expectation that I do what I'm been asked, or that whether I'm doing the things in the ways that they want him to do. And I think when you reach that roadblock where you're not looking at each other eye to eye, and you don't have control, or the other person doesn't have control, things fall apart. And I think ownership and control of your own business is the most important thing if you're going to be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
And at 24, I had all my eggs in one basket, all my contracts. I was doing things that were completely non-funded by these investors who were even being put into the same vehicle. I was following a path of what I think my trajectory of entrepreneurship should look like. And I was very lucky. I met a guy called Sean Hurwitz in South Africa a year before, thanks to another gentleman called Howie, who's an incredible man. And it's the power of relationships.
Sure.
When you're looking for money, ask for advice. Doesn't mean the person will give you the money. But if you don't have the right advice, stop looking. And I went to Sean for advice. I sat down with him in Cape Town. I said, I'm going through this. I want to buy more land, but I can't because we're fighting over what we're going to do in the future. And he said, David, you have 2 options. He put 2 sheets of paper on the table. I cannot forget it. After 3 espressos, he drew a $ sign on one and a $ sign on the other. And he said, choose one. So it looks the same. He said, it's not. In one, I back you legally to fight for what you want inside the business that you've built so far. In another, I back you to start over and have full control of your business. This is a loan. You pay me back when you're ready. I don't know why. God puts angels in your path. This was a loan. I paid it back. I did right by these guys. I started over. Very ambitious, very angry, to be honest. Very hurt. But I think sometimes you need that. You need that impulse. You need that power you need those lessons early on. I'd rather have it early on than later on. And I think what I've continued to build now and what I've built since has always been with these 3 pillars. A lot of good ethics. Don't do anything that you would ever regret. Always build something that you have control over. If you're a founder and you're giving up control over what you're building, you're an employee now. And I've learned this. I'm 33 years old. I've learned that today, what I'm building, I will have control over. And the day I cannot have control over what I'm building and how I'm building it and how I envision it and how I expect to be trusted, I'm not willing to continue building because now I'm just building something for someone else.
Sure.
And the third thing is do it with people you love. Love is such a powerful thing. I learned this from a guy called Jaime. He's actually a therapist, a coach of mine. He's amazing. He talks about love at the workplace, which is very different than what HR talks about, love at the workplace. This is what leaders should be talking about more. Love is about embracing people. Again, embracing people in a way that you're taking in everything they've got to offer and making the best of it. And I think I've learned to love the people I work with. And that's probably the most exciting part of what I do every day. Because if it goes wrong, at least you're doing it with people you love.
Sure. I mean, there's almost, I'm going to do a disservice by moving on from those lessons? Because you could probably spend a good full podcast episode on those,
I
both
spent a
learned
couple months
wisdom
on it.
and principally.
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing that, David. I think it wasn't it wasn't an easy time. Rather, you've again had this investor angel, if you would, come in and potentially save the business. The business 2018 ends.
2017, yeah.
That's 2017. 2018, you end up going on to triple the business.
Yep.
Building clinics, more developments around
zero.
the country, starting from zero, exactly. So maybe right person, right place, right time.
Yes.
And we're able to now build again with the lessons of what you'd already done. So maybe a blessing in disguise. Obviously, we're talking physical bricks and mortar. You now run a tech business, and I just want to understand where did that pivot come in? Because I think you'd mentioned to me previously you had a friend that had constantly been almost pulling on the strings of tempting you to join a fintech, and you were always curious about the world of tech. You obviously have a technical background, having built very early websites. Talk to us about how this pivots, if you would, from physical bricks and mortar business into getting into the tech world, which now you're obviously building so actively in.
I think it's 2 or 3 things. The first one is I did a master's at UCT after I started my construction company, knowing that it's not that I've wasted my time by starting from scratch, but it's like I've got to go back and equip myself and be ready for what's next, not knowing what that could be. And that master's was in something really cool called inclusive innovation. It humbled me. It taught me how to show up. Showing up is everything. It matters. How do you get involved inside of a community, and how do you work with them? And I was doing that in construction. Look, man, when we were building houses, there was 3 secrets to our approach. The first one was we would survey every town with tech. As builders, we would go to every school and do a digital survey of how much money do you make, how many kids you have, where do you bank, do you have a subsidy, where do you rent or do you stay at a friend's house? And we would use data to negotiate with municipalities, with banks, and do everything we did data focused. So tech has always been part of what we do. And if you're a builder and you're not doing that, you're not building. Because building is about being part of the community, understanding what they're looking for. The second thing that I think was critical for me is I became very close friends as a builder with people in the venture space that were funding ventures in Namibia. I started to see capital coming into the country for building factories, for doing these type of things.
Sure.
But then it's this guy, my friend Simcha Numark, also a guy from the University of Chicago. And this is, again, you can see themes like relationships that matter. He lived in Israel, was a Brazilian guy, started a tech company, had raised $20-30 million, called me up, said, you ever heard of a goldfish? I said, what are you talking about? He says, you're a goldfish, but you're a goldfish in a fishbowl. And you measure 1 to 3 centimeters. And if I drop a goldfish in a river, it grows to about 30 to 33 centimeters. He attacked me with this metaphor. And he said, you've been at a fishbowl for years. He was referring to Namibia, which is a country of 2.5 million people. You should be doing more with your life. I admire you. You should be in the tech space. You can grow to 10 times the size. So I said, cool, where's my flight ticket? Like, where do you need me?
Yes.
So I flew to Israel. I went to see his business. He was doing a business at the time of a fintech. And I was impressed. He took me around. I went to San Francisco with him. I went to Brazil with him. I spent time. He was raising money from SoftBank at the time. He's now exited the company and sold it to a bank in Brazil very successfully. But as a mentor, friend, or someone who cared about me, and there's many people, I'm sure, in many people's lives that we don't notice, I took that lesson to life. Now, I didn't join him. He wanted me to move to Brazil to do these things. But I looked around where I was in Namibia. I was happy. I was excited. And I said to myself, I'm going to go build something tech-related. And I spent probably all of our money. I sat down with my brother Samuel, and I said, dude, I need all of our money. And we're going to figure out what we're going to go do next. This was around the time of the pandemic. And the entire inflection point was over one anecdote, which was a woman called Inge Shatona Shekupe. We were building in a border town between Angola and Namibia. This border town had 2,000 people. We were building 50 homes. Imagine, we were like doubling the size of the formal housing in this town. After we built, supermarkets came in and banks came in, 3 and 3. It's unbelievable what property development can do to the economic development of a town and how money just turns more. But while I was there, this woman comes up to me with 2,000 rand in bills of 200. Looked like she was just withdrawing it from the bank.
Sure.
And she says, Tate, David, I want to buy 20 bags of cement. Now, at the time, I was buying cement for 100 rand. She nailed the price. Only 3 people in my company knew.
Sure.
So, where do you know I sell? I don't sell cement. Sorry. And she said, no, come on, man. I'm the lady who sells onions. I said, no, I know who you are. She sold onions outside my office for 1 to 3 rand, depending on the size. She would eyeball them and say 3 rand, 2 rand, 1 rand. But I'm sorry, I don't sell cement. It was Sunday. I was walking around this 2,000 people town, literally 12-hour drive from Windhoek. And she says to me, no, but Yvonne, who works with me for about 5 years now,
Sure.
said to me that you're a very nice guy. So I was like, all right, listen, lady, happy Sunday. Let's go.
Yes.
Where do you need your 20 bags? I'll deliver them. No, I'll hire someone to pick them up. I said, no. Now I'm curious, dude. I drive the 20 bags of cement to her plot. Now, I didn't build her a house. I know she's got no money. She made I asked her later, about 1,500 rand a month selling onions. That's a lot of onions. Maybe a few creams, a few little catalog things, but pretty low income. When I show up to her plot, I was upset. There was 30,000 cement bricks on her plot. Now I'm delivering cement. She's dug a house, what looked like a 120 square meter, 130 square meter, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, en-suite house. She dug it out. She wants to build a foundation. The bricks are ready on the side. She's got a plan in her hand. I'm angry, dude. Like, I'm building houses for teachers, nurses, police officers. My brother Sammy flew to China. We spent $40,000 buying a brick factory. We spent about $10,000 moving the brick factory to Ruacana. And there's a lady here buying bricks from who the hell? So I'm like, wait, who the hell did you buy these bricks from? I said, no, myself. Now I'm like confused, not angry.
Yes.
Because this woman makes onions all day.
Sure.
She says, no, I've been making them one by one every single day for the last year and a half. I said, how? Now I'm like, breathing hard. I have a video of this. I uploaded it on Facebook, the entire interaction.
Yes.
And she shows me this little mold, dude. And my entire mind just goes into like every single direction, questioning my existence. Now, we spent crazy amount of money.
Yeah.
We've been servicing the world trying to build housing. And here's this woman who sells onions, who has a little market stand, who's a little merchant, who has no supply chain, who has no growth, who's able to make 30,000 bricks, just purchased out of I should have not sold her in retrospect today and looking back, but purchased 20 bags of cement to go build her foundation. She's fulfilling the dream of her household. And I'm only able to build 50. The scale is with her. And I realized very quickly after interacting with her, this woman has a beautiful home today, completely built by her and small support from us to finish it. I realized very quickly that if we wanted to build more homes, we needed to help supply stores. We needed to help stores with building their businesses stronger. And it's never been for me about how many bricks I lay or how many deliveries I make. It's about how much impact can we have, because that's when the business happens.
Sure.
And at that point, I wouldn't call it a pivot. I call it a transformation. Every time you cannot pivot things, you transform things. To pivot means you went away from it.
Sure.
To transform things means you take what you've learned, something great, and you build something.
It's an evolution, right?
And that's what it is. JABU, which is the business I've started now and run, and have incredible people in our team that are working with me on this amazing vision and mission, is about how do we make these merchants more successful? How do we make part of this economy rotate faster? And what is our role in that game?
Of course, that's not restricted to the construction space. Naturally, the opportunity exists really in the broader informal market and informal retail space, logistics, payments, supply chain. I know you're working on a number of those problems. A lot of that, of course, came to light as well through the pandemic, where you needed to help distribute food to families, and you start to realize all these kinks in the food distribution supply chain, everything from wholesale pricing with FMCGs and where the opportunity sat there profit-wise.
Yeah.
And I want you to just tell us a very brief moment, because, let's not call it a pivot. Let's call it a transformation. You're still running a construction business.
My brother, I don't.
Right.
I'm a shareholder, but my brother Sammy
No, not right now. Excuse me. 2020. At this point, you're still running the construction business with your brother Sammy, and you take this money, you buy trucks out of the business to buy trucks and to start what would be, I guess, a logistics supply chain with what was the very early days of JABU. Some technical components, I imagine, to it as you start to map needs and potentially where these spaza stores are.
Yeah.
Talk to us about how this evolves into the JABU of today. I mean, how have you gone from moving from, again, still very asset heavy physical infrastructure to a software company, and you need money to start a software business, right? So tell us about maybe the fundraising process as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, at the time of starting JABU, I built a website.
Yep.
Before I did anything.
I think we're going to come to you for our website.
Yeah,
the sounds of it, man.
I think your website is but your website is amazing. I think
there's a magic touch on this.
Today you have to make a Facebook page or an Instagram page or a TikTok page.
Sure.
Maybe I'm wrong and I'm antiquated. The first thing I did was I built a website. I actually might have registered an Instagram page. I bought a logo on Fiverr for $5. I printed shirts. A lot of people criticize me. A lot of my friends, like, dude, every time you have an idea, you buy a website, you make a shirt, you make a logo. This is what gets me going. Forget the world. Whatever makes you feel like you're on a path, do it.
And to see that and also to have a touch and feel of the brand, right?
That's it.
Materializes the vision.
If you, I get chills every time I see my first logo. Like we've gone to 3 logos. Maybe we'll change 5 more times. Maybe we'll change the company name. But there's nothing like that key to the door. And anyone who tells you that you're doing it wrong is stepping on your shoes. Because I think entrepreneurship is your journey. And my journey's always been, I make a website, I make a logo, I print a shirt, tell everyone what I'm doing, and then I go figure it out.
Sure.
My uncle used to tell me, how come you don't make 50% profit on housing? My uncle Sammy passed away actually right before I started JABU. He would be proud today of what we're doing. And I said, dude, it's impossible. No one makes 50% on housing. He says, it's very easy. You put a price and you build for half of it. And I could never get him to agree with me that doesn't exist. You know?
Sure.
But anyway, that was his way of entrepreneurship. Yes. My way of entrepreneurship is I put a price later. Right now I'm going to make a logo, make a website, make a shirt. And that's what we did with JABU.
Yep.
We started working with the Poepkewits Foundation, which is an incredible family in Namibia. A woman called Meryl Berry, who every year wanted us to help build clinics and schools as part of our construction output. And we never really made a buck of it, but we loved the impact we had. And she compensated our time enough to be able to cover our employees.
Sure.
That year, she took money from building a clinic to saying, I need to give food to a lot of people.
This is pandemic contextually for everybody. Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I've got a few trucks sitting around. I'll pay the fuel if you pay all the food. I don't need to get paid for this. We made shirts. We made a website. And we called it JABU Logistics. JABU Logistics was built to deliver food on the pandemic. And I told her that if she let me do it instead of some other food distribution company, I would build an app, which I had built for housing, and digitize. This is me thinking about how I tech this stuff. Digitize every point we give out free food so that she would get a heat map and understand the demographics, and then we could go to the government and explain all the real issues and then go build more clinics or schools. This was my vision.
Yes.
I'm stuck in construction. I'm not letting myself out of my old ways. And then I realized it's impossible to even do anything in the space. People are actually very poor in the places where food is really needed. Like if you have to go give out free food in a village and that's the real need, there's a bigger problem, a real need. But in the process, I learned about food. I learned about pricing. I got preferential pricing for food that I didn't realize was there. I did a lot of transport of goods with our trucks. And I told my brother, I'm going to spend the next month or two delivering food myself and selling it at the price I'm buying it for to see if people want it. And I would describe JABU in 3 phases. And I've thought about this a lot on my way here because in retrospect, everything can be structured.
Sure.
Phase 1 is me on a truck with 4 ladies with a very bright blue shirt I found at PEP that said JABU.
Is that the same JABU blue today?
Yes. It's because of whatever shirt I could find at a PEP store at the Grove Mall of Namibia.
Yep.
Right? And like some of these things, it's like, how did you come up with that? Boom. You know, and same thing with many other things that happen in our company. But I loaded a truck. Phase 1 was loading a truck every single day for 2 months. We were using a restaurant till app for selling tables, like for selling food per table in order to digitize ourselves. But every day I went with this Walton's receipt books that you can buy that have carbon copy.
Sure.
I bought 20, 30 of them. I was pissed because they're like 50 Rand each. I was like, this is very expensive for what I'm doing. But I filled up my truck with them, a lot of pens, a buck of big pens, a price list, which was made by hand by one of the ladies who worked with me, Helia, because we were taking the prices from the invoices of what we had just bought. Later, we found out we forgot to put the VAT, so we were selling under cost the first couple of days. But we went around tuck shop by tuck shop, and we started selling stuff. And I realized very quickly, this is huge. People were giving us a God bless you. But outside of giving us a God bless you, they were paying us. Like there wasn't, normally you get one or the other, right? When we donated food, God bless you was there. When you pay for something, no one says God bless you at a restaurant when you pay the bill. Like, oh, God bless you. Like if you're coming out of church, but not on a Tuesday. In this case, people were thanking us and paying us.
Yeah, it was a marriage of the
and
two,
I was like,
right?
this feels so good. Like I do this for a living.
Sure.
And phase 2 was, this cannot stand anymore, because we were arriving in phase 1 to the office everyone worked at JABU till midnight in phase 1. There was no such thing as leaving the office before midnight. We had to wash our hands when we got back, offload the trucks with the products. And this is 6, 7 p.m., count every receipt, put it back into the restaurant till to close the table. We had to count the money, the coins, prepare it for the next day to take it to the bank, but keep some petty cash for a receipt. Like, it was crazy, dude. My brother thought I went nuts. He said, you should double your therapy sessions. Like, like now you do need help. Before I wasn't sure. Phase 2 was we built an e-commerce. We raised money, and I'll get to it in your questions, but we built an e-commerce. We raised our seed round. We've even raised our Series A during this phase 2, where we've actually said, we cannot deliver in a truck without knowing what people need. We're actually trying to figure out, our mission is to figure out how do we make merchants more sustainable so the economy can grow, so money can turn faster. And we do 3 things in phase 2. One is we warehouse products. I cannot run around buying products before the day kicks off. So we started warehousing products so we could have everything available to reach as many merchants as possible. We then expanded to Zambia and South Africa and did this in 11 cities. The second thing we did in phase 2 is the wheels and deals. We said, like, well, the only way that once people order, we will get the stuff delivered to them. Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody understood how to do it. We bought some trucks. We did third-party trucks through one of our apps. And we then started moving all of these products in and out, in and out, in and out. Third thing we did, and I call this A, B, and C. C happens to be cash. We dealt with your money. The reason people want to do business with us is, 1, we can help them order. 2, we can get them the stuff they need. But 3, and the most important also for the brands, is we can help them pay for these things. People are not banked. This is a fact. I'm banked because I get a salary that goes into my bank account and then I have to spend it somehow. Shops don't get a salary from anyone. They get payments from people who got payments from other people who had money. And very often this money ends up in cash or in wallets or in random things. The case for Namibia, the case for Zambia, and also the case for informal sector South Africa, people are getting paid in cash. And that cash is going nowhere. I don't care how many M-Pesas you throw at me. In Kenya, cash is king. And queen, right? It's a relationship between 2 hands. And money was being sent around, paid around, and brands cannot even, if they want to deliver, if they want to warehouse, if they want to do e-commerce, which is step 1 and 2 of what we do, brands are not willing to pick up your funds. And money gets stuck in somebody's hand, and by the time it crosses 3 hands, it gets lost and miscounted and not reconciled. And over the last period of phase 2, we've become good. We've made many mistakes, but we've learned that we're really good at C. And that C we're really good at. We're starting phase 3 right now. We're betting big on it. We've got licenses this year in Zambia and in Namibia. We're working on that as well. And we're helping not just the tuck shop pay for stuff, but the money help it move from forecourts, petrol stations, restaurants, how it moves between all these merchants. It's an intricate web of transactions, how it all moves around all the way up to the brand. Because the money might move 6, 7 times as the product crosses hand. Once it gets consumed, you need to put it back in the market, and that's when the money eventually flows all the way to a few hands. And I describe it as we need to participate as often as possible inside of the cycle of the economy, because that grows the economy. But the minute it gets out of the economy, we got to get it back in as soon as possible to do that again. And I think if we can do that, we will grow our markets, we will grow our merchants, and we will help trade really exist.
David, I mean, that is an incredibly short synopsis of what's been a 3-year journey, actually.
By now, yes.
4-year journey by now. And of course, one of the big things that, and possibly maybe to their plight, but many a founder will think that they're restricted because they don't have the capital to execute on these things. JABU, again, came from a position of an existing business in 2020 when you approached Sam to say, hey, I want to pivot into this thing. We're going to figure it out. Took a lot of business and took a lot of cash off the construction business's balance sheet, right, in order to do this and explore. But it did reach a point where you needed to raise actual venture capital. And you've seen that world. You've been to Silicon Valley. You understand the tech space quite well. Even despite some of the success, the touch points that you might have had, the relationships that you built, won't you describe very briefly for us your process of raising capital to really fund some of this growth, this expansion, this ABC evolution, if you would? Because it actually wasn't as easy as people might think.
Very hard. It feels impossible until it's not. And there's two parts to it. One is people will help you raise the capital. And there's two types of people. But the other one is you have to have the conviction, the never-ending conviction that what you're building is something you want to build. Now, on the people side, I think there was two types of people that helped. Ones that supported you emotionally. My brother Sammy and my brother Ari, my girlfriend at the time, like whoever is behind you. These are incredible people in your journey. Friends. I remember a friend of mine, Lisa, she flew all the way from Germany, said, I love what you're doing. I'm going to help you raise the capital as a friend. Moved into my house, opened a laptop every day, helped me, how do we make a presentation? We raised the capital, flew out. But that took months, man. That took months. That took 400 no's. That took a lot of pressure, a lot of money from us because we were so lucky, Matthew. We actually had funds. And it's not lucky. I was fortunate to have brothers who said, yeah, let's try it. But like we bought trucks, we bought products, we put it in a warehouse, we did all these things. But what if we didn't raise the money? It would have all gone down. But you know what? What an exciting life it would be to know you did that and now you have to start over because you tried so hard. Like trying so hard has no price. And I think if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to spend everything that is there doing something you really, truly believe in, no one should fund you. And I think that was the first thing. The reality is on the other side, and to finish this first point, there are type of people who are also making introductions. We spoke about this, you and I, in one of our chats in Cape Town once over a coffee. A guy, friend of mine, Guimar, called me on my birthday. I've been raising money since December. It's March 26th. Said, how's it going, man? How's the new startup? I said, no, I haven't raised the money. What? It's been 4 months. I know, but like, everyone says no. Everyone loves it, thinks about it, asks me questions. They negotiate me. Some people say Evan Dreyer gave me $6,000, $7,000. This other guy, some guy in Germany sent me a small check, but like, just pays. I didn't have a salary.
Sure.
He said, give me 1 second. I think an hour later, I got a call from Gaurav Jain. Indian, Canadian, Harvard Business School, worked at Google, worked in venture capital, started his second fund, was doing amazing stuff. Heard from my friend, this guy David is a force of nature. 3 words, 1 introduction, wrote me a check the next day. After 400 no's. And I think what I can tell you is 2 things. One is the 400 no's got me there. Timeline-wise, because you need the time to pass. You need my friend to be exhausted and to say, I'll get you an introduction. But also, what you learn from pitching your business while you're building it gives you 2 pumps. Your conviction that you are still pushing and you will go till the end. And that guy heard that conviction after 4 months. But also the real way on how to tell the story of what you're building. Because I messed up telling people what I thought about. And also, I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't know what I was building. So I think when people say it's hard to raise money, no, you're in the process of learning how to sell your business, to explain your business, and to carry on your business. And this is something that never ends.
You're still raising now.
Yeah, well, right now we're still really well funded from our Series A.
But
we have a good. But I'm still speaking to my current investors, to future investors. I need to explain why, when we're doing A, B, and C, I'm now going to go channel big and C because I believe that's the future of our business. Now I'm in charge. I'm the captain. And if I'm driving through a storm, I need to also be able to make a right, to not drop off the products there and say, we're going to offload stuff. I'm not turning back because you're telling me to go deliver all the way there. And you've got to learn to be able to tell the story of how you move through storms, how you move through seasons, how you move through cycles, not just to your investors, but to your friends. You know, I'm building this business not just with Sammy and Ari, my brothers, or my dad, or my friends, but Kevin, who's Venezuelan and grew up with me, Eugene, who's Ukrainian and left his home, Israeli like Yoav, Luimar, who's Angolan, and all the Namibians and Zambians and South Africans who are backing us in this process. And I think these are people who've given their heart and soul, and they need to also be part of the story.
Yeah, it speaks to the DNA of a pretty incredible business, David. And I think when folks meet you, they are probably enamored with both conviction and both almost this never say die attitude. But at the same time, that really comes across in your team. And I think that's culture that's bred, values that is bred from vision and then flows its way down. I think just to quickly sum up your fundraising experience, because most folks would have seen JABU probably in the press before they would have seen JABU as a prospective customer. That call really did change the trajectory of the business, that intro from your friend. You raised almost $1 million in 2 nights after having raised almost nothing in 4 months. Amazing power of relationships there. Early 2021, you end up raising this $3 million seed round. You actually get accepted into Y Combinator. A pity, I think that was remote during pandemic days, but nonetheless, one of a very small handful of companies that have been able to get in there. And then, of course, Feb 2022 last year, which it will take a few months in terms of when the money was raised, you raised a pretty significant $15 million Series A. Tiger Global leads that round, famed hedge fund manager turned VC. And, I guess the rest you can say is history. But you're now in this position, and it almost seems like a massive disservice not to just talk about the future and these plans and this A, B, and C and how that's evolved. I'm just conscious of time, of course, today.
Yep.
The business has great runway. It's learned a lot of lessons over the last 3 years. Talk to me about the next 6 months, because it sounds like you're probably going to be moving from more of a supply chain business, which may be your bread and butter still, but into a fintech and really understanding the flow of payments, the movement of cash, and optimizing that for your users. Talk to me about what's exciting in the next 6 months. The team is 70 strong now, and they're going to be devoted on this mission. Mike is yours.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is what I get excited about every morning. Waking up and knowing that you're building something that's going to have a massive impact, regardless of the times. And I think our business was born out of a necessity of a merchant to be able to improve her life. And we've got to always be looking into what will get those merchants a better ending and also us more sustainability. About 1.5 years ago, we made a decision to expand from A and B to C. To say, we can't continue to just be picking up cash and driving it to the bank after every sale. It's unsustainable.
It's not capital efficient at all.
It's nuts. Like, you lose money doing it, a lot of it. So we started applying for our wallets. An amazing guy in our team, Walia Kampamba in Zambia, led the efforts. He was ex-fintech. Actually met him the same day I met you. Came up to me, said, I heard what you're building. Loved what you said on stage. How can I join you? And the day I met you, he joined our team, not knowing for what. 3 months later, we started applying into the license. A year later, we got our fintech license in Zambia to digitize money. We're now working with the Innovation Hub of the Central Bank of Namibia under Governor Gawase. And our last 1.5 years has been so focused on trying to pay attention to, can we do C really well? C is literally digitizing cash at the point of sale. Digitizing it immediately, making it available to you immediately to trade with each other as a merchant, to trade with your suppliers, with your wholesalers, with your merchants, or with the brands.
So literally the moment your merchant gets paid,
yes,
that money reflects and they can use it.
The moment our merchant gets paid with cash.
Which is the majority of payment.
Which is, in Namibia, it's almost 100%. In Zambia, it's a very high majority.
Sure.
We can discuss in which vertical and whatnot.
Sure.
There are different JABU cash points where the money gets physically digitized. Then a cash in transit deals with that as a third party. This is an extremely asset-light process for us. Our hands are not touching the money. All the money is getting digitized at all the touch points. And we've been 1.5 years running this internally. It's not a pilot. It's a business inside our business. And it's been incredible because we've seen for 1.5 years how we're profitable doing this. And people have been paying JABU because JABU has been the source of supply, the source of everything and the source of everyone. Now, we don't deliver bread, and beer is becoming really expensive to deliver. Heineken acquired NBL. We can go into all the things. But when we look at all this stuff, we're like, if we have to bet our future on one thing that we're doing really well, and we want to impress the venture firms about where we're headed from a P&L perspective, from a sustainability perspective, and everyone hearing me knows that this is now the norm.
Well, that's the narrative. It's not,
This is the narrative.
not growth at all costs. Now it's about back to basics.
We've never been
proper
growth at all
fundamentals.
costs, and I must admit, this is why we've been so capital efficient. I think many peers in industry are always growth at all costs because they're looking for their next round.
Sure.
I come from construction, for God's sake.
Sure.
I
about
cannot
optimizing
lose the
costs.
screws and
Yep.
the cement because now I don't make a profit on the house.
Yep.
So are we CM1, CM2 positive when we deliver? Sure. Are we ever going to get to CM3, contribution margin 3 positive? At what scale? With how much money? In how many markets? What do we do right in what we do that still accomplishes our mission? And for a year and a half, we've been doing it really well since our Series A. It's been growing. And I think right now it's what we call all hands on deck. We play that song in all of our all hands meetings. And all hands on deck means every single person in our team is working over the clock, night and day, to make sure that we are digitizing all of our merchants' cash and that we are bringing back into the loop all of the brands, wholesalers, retailers as partners in our journey to make sure that that's what we're building very strong. And I think JABU is focusing in one of our 3 things that we do well. And we're excited for it. We're excited because we're hiring as well. As much as it looks like a refocus may mean people get lost along the way. Sure. What we've built is a community-focused approach. And I think the community is applauding our efforts to getting them more connected back into the formality of the sector, which is all the suppliers and the brands.
I mean, David, as a friend of yours, as an observer, you just can't see this business failing because it is this beautiful marriage of conviction, a customer centricity, a healthy obsession over solving real pain points on the ground.
Yes.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that you're hiring because I don't know how folks who might be in the job market who listen to this episode wouldn't want to put their application in to join this. The term rocket ship gets thrown around a heck of a lot, but this is a very, very exciting opportunity, a venture, and of course, all the success to you. We like to finish off an episode, and it's almost a pity that we have to, but I like to ask the question of founders, and it's probably apparent here, but you might have an anecdote or two. What does success look like for David? It was to become president when he was a kid, and maybe that culminates in something. Clearly, you've got a massive purpose drive and impact drive as well, but you're definitely not the guy who's going to be 90 years old one day, sitting on his stoop, whether it's in Namibia or anywhere else, who's just looking at the assets he's accumulated. What would you say? What does success look like for David Akinin?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And the first thing that came to mind was that I didn't feel successful when we raised money. I felt accountable. And I think a lot of people attribute the amount of capital we've raised or the business size that we have and put that next to the term success. And it's like, oh, look, you're a successful entrepreneur. Doesn't make you a successful entrepreneur. It makes you an accountable entrepreneur. I think success for me is, and I have felt successful. Let me rephrase that. When I have sat down with either a client or a colleague and heard feedback about the journey we're on that makes them feel excited. We've retrenched a few drivers in every one of our branches. Like, we're not driving trucks. The trucks were being third party. And I sat down with a guy called Simeon and a guy called Petrus on the weekend. I sat down with every single one. And Petrus told me he's hurt. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry that you're hurt. Could you tell me maybe why? I want to hear what's the reason. And he said that he was hurt because he's a 36-year-old driver. And he said during his lifetime, he's never felt more respected. He's never felt like he had so much growth, and he's never felt so connected to a mission like during his time at JABU for 3 or 4 years that he was in. And yeah, it's a bittersweet feeling because he's hurt. This is how he started the sentence. Sure. But also it was a sweet feeling because I realized we built something and I felt success. And it's horrible to say it in this context, but that is my definition of success. Knowing that your efforts, your investment of time and money has actually built something that is bringing dignity, respect, and happiness, and a job, and compensation, and support to families that are out there. Families like mine, where I grew up, where my father was able to come home, feed us, dress us, and help us dream and get inspired. And I think creating jobs is a definition of success. Creating sustainable jobs is a harder definition of success. And having a vision for how you can continue to do that. And it sounds very selfless, but I think success cannot be selfish, because then it's arrogance. And yeah, it's very introspective. It's hard. I felt it very much recently, and I seek these moments where I can actually know that and get confirmation. Success is also about confirmation that what have you done and what have you put can make you feel good. And sometimes people attribute that confirmation with a raise of capital, and maybe it's something that we're not often giving ourselves enough of a kind of, oh wow, I'm successful, I raised that. No, but what about the real stuff? Like the money can sit in an account and generate interest, but what did you do with it? And
what affirms you?
Yeah, that's been the most beautiful part of building JABU so far, and why I have so much conviction. Because if I didn't have that touch point, I wouldn't build this thing. I would leave it.
Yeah, I mean, David, I think that answer is such a wonderful epitome and a great summation probably of this conversation. I am confident that we're only seeing the very start at 33, goodness me, of the David Akinin journey. I think that the audience will listen to this, and if you don't walk away inspired, part challenged, part convicted about what you're building and why, and also building for the future, then I think that we would have done you a massive disservice. But I think you're going to make our job quite easy because of the nature of the convo. Thank you so much, of course, for being on the show today, for your vulnerability, for sharing with us the things that you have. Ladies and gentlemen, David Akinin, founder of JABU.
Thanks, Matt. And I wish you a lot of luck. Honestly, what you're pushing through is trailblazing. I remember when we built the clinic once, you had to cut a bunch of bush trees in order to actually build the road because you couldn't get the materials there. And then people showed up one day, it was like, oh, what a cool clinic. But why didn't you make it taller or bigger or faster? And it's like, no one realizes that it takes someone to cut the bush, to open the path, to make the road, before you can even start bringing the materials in. And I'm sure the materials are already being brought in by you, but what you're doing is the definition of trailblazing. I commend you for it. I don't know how much more we can support you. I think listening to your podcast is one way, because you're creating this trail by doing this. But it's so important that you continue doing it, that you don't let the harder moments pull you down, and that you reach out to us and make us accountable to helping you do this, because we want to bring in more materials. We want to build it stronger, bigger, faster. But without that path you've built so far, it's impossible to do. I mean it.
You're very kind, David. Thank you. From your mouth to God's ears, right?
Yes, 100%. I wish.
Thank you for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks.
Right, pal. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. That was David Akinin, founder and CEO of JABU. I'm Matthew Marsden, and if you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to subscribe to our channel, follow us on our socials, and share with your network. See you next time.